and welcome to Seder Segments Part 5. In this video, we are going to take a look at some of the special symbols on the Seder plate which require extra mentioning. Following Dayenu, we make reference to three central symbols on the Seder plate. The Zeroah, the Shank-bone, which in the Haggadah is called Pesach, like the name Pesach, Passover, Matzah, and Maror, the bitter herb. So why do we make special mention of these three symbols exclusively? Keep in mind, bear in mind that although we do eat a bit of the matzah and we eat the maror, they have great symbolic value. Each is identified with the slavery experience. I say this because too many of us begin the Seder with the intent of rushing through the ceremony to arrive at dinner. I remember when I was a child, the Seders were usually at my house, and before we even sat down, members of my family would start moaning, "Can we get through this ceremony quickly so we can have dinner?" It misses the entire purpose. The Seder is about recognizing symbols. It's not about food. It's about recognizing the matzah, recognizing the bitter herb for their symbolic purpose of appreciating the freedoms that we all cherish. So when the Seder turns into a me-oriented, narcissistic experience, then it becomes just another meal, no different from any other meal throughout the year. Now I know that Passover is a good excuse for family get-togethers, in most years at least, and therefore it's an excuse for a nice meal, but we can't ignore or bypass the importance of the symbolism. Aside from all that, think of the message that we convey to our children when we devote time to Passover's special symbols, to the Seder's special ritual symbols. The message is, life is not merely about indulging ourselves. There is a need for us to stop and contemplate our life and the fact that what we have should never be taken for granted, but should be experienced with joy and with a little bit of devotion. I think when we take time to enjoy the symbols, we are saying that maybe there is more to life than just our own pleasures. And as we think about the temporary restrictions that are being forcibly imposed upon us now in this such unusual, unprecedented circumstance, it makes us understand that hardships in life are a reality. And they do remind us that we have to take the moment to cherish what we have. So now let's take a look at the symbols, the three symbols themselves, the Pesach, the Zeroah, the Shank-bone, the Matzah, and the Maror, the bitter herb. The symbols are introduced by a rabbi whose name was Rabbi Gamliel. Just so you know a little something about this rabbi, his history, Rabbi Gamliel, this particular Rabbi Gamliel, as there were a few, lived after the destruction of the Second Temple, which took place in the year 70 of the Common Era. Even though there was no longer a temple, which meant no more sacrifices and no more Passover offering, Rabbi Gamliel insisted that we recognize the symbols of the past, including the Pesach, including the Shank-bone, even if the sacrifice was no longer integral to the Passover ritual. Remember, in biblical times, the Passover observance was centered around an offering. According to Rabbi Gamliel, even without the offering in a post-temple exilic period, nevertheless, to maintain continuity with the past, we still speak about this cherished ritual. It is part of the Jewish will to honor our past, no matter what has transpired, even if our past is filled with moments of defeat, as with the destruction of the Second Temple and the exile of the Jews from their holy land. We nevertheless remember the symbols by which our early forebears observed the holiday of Passover. So going a little bit further, when we arrive at each of the three symbols, we point to each of them. When we focus and concentrate on each symbol before reading the paragraph explaining that symbol, we point to the symbol itself. So that when we talk about the Passover offering, talk about the Shank-bone, we first point to the Shank-bone as a way of identifying with the symbol on a more personal level rather than being detached. And each of the three symbols, the Shank-bone, the Matzah, and the bitter herb, each is referred to by a biblical verse. And then that biblical verse is used to remind us from where we have come. So that gives us a little bit of background concerning these three symbols. Just one brief anecdote. When I was a rabbinical student living in Israel, we were taken to an area of the West Bank, known really as Samaria, and we were treated to a special sacrifice that was still observed and honored by the people of that community. In other words, the Jews who lived in that area of Samaria were biblical Jews. They still adhered to the biblical traditions, the biblical rituals. They were not, I wouldn't say they eschewed the rabbinic rituals, but they lived by biblical principles. Rabbinic Judaism was really anathema to their practice. What that meant was they were still sacrificing animals. And we watched the ceremony and recognized that even though they were honoring the biblical practice of Passover, it was as if these people were from Venus or Mars. Their ritual was totally alien to our way of practicing, which again reminds us that while we maintain continuity with the past and while we offer at their table, we were still reminded of the Passover offering through the symbol of the Shank-bone. Nevertheless, we've moved forward. We conduct our Passover through a Seder, not through a sacrifice. We no longer live like that. Our Judaism has evolved. And that's the beauty, that we can maintain continuity with the past while still experiencing Judaism in the present and the future. So with all that in mind, again, Chag Kasher V'Sameach to everyone.